Okay, we'll make a start. There may be a few other stragglers will come along, but we'll see how we can. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the innovation session of Leadership Imperative. Let me ask you one question first of all. How many of you probably naturally would say, yeah, I'm quite innovative? Yeah, that's about roughly, whenever I ask a group, doesn't matter what the size is, about a fifth of the hands go up. And I'm always interested when I talk to people, so why don't you think you're innovative? And people kind of think, well, that's for other people. And I would say to people, I would probably suggest to you that if your life was under threat, you'd suddenly become very creative or very innovative. So what I'm going to take you through this afternoon is just some ideas and suggestions. This is in no way a template that you have to do something. Some of the stuff you might very well not agree with, and that's great. You don't like it, that's great as well. Just three things about me. My background is sales and marketing. When I was in corporate life, I worked in about 4 industries. Now it's my own company. I've worked in about 20 industries. So I get quite a perspective of where innovation is or isn't. And I won't share specific names with you. I'll give you some examples of what's been going on. In the UK, before I left for Asia 20 years ago, I'm a former Football League and Premier League referee. So I'm quite used to being insulted and have things thrown at me. So it's don't hold back if you want a challenge. And the last one is I've got 5 daughters and I travelled a lot. So between that, and one of those daughters is a prison governor in the UK. She runs a prison. So pick the bones out of that one, as they say. Okay, let's just have a look. I think with innovation, it comes up a lot. It comes up a lot on conference agendas. CEOs, which we work with, will say we've got to be more innovative. But that's when it kind of falls over. You know, people say we need to be innovative, but how do we go about it? And today's objectives, as I said a bit before, if you walk away with just some ideas and everything you'll see this afternoon, you can do back at your office. There is no magic theory. There is no whopping great amount of resources you've suddenly got to put into this. It's a question of when you go away. And by the way, if you give me a business card at the end, I'll send you the presentation, so don't have to worry about notes. There's no royalties. It's free, don't worry, but don't worry about that. Okay, and basically, the screen, innovation's all around us. If you look in your pocket, in your bag, innovation is around us all the time, and we kind of think, well, that's up to somebody else. If you think about going back to Edison and the light bulb all those years ago, right up to date with maybe the iPhone and Apple and everything else in between. Innovation is all around us. But I think in relation to innovation, people sometimes think it's got to be huge. It's got to be a wow. And it hasn't. It could be small incremental pieces of innovation that just keep you moving forward, getting better, reducing losses, increasing revenues, what have you. As you'll see towards the end of the presentation, I'll take you through a process that we use with companies that goes through this process, and it works for them, and I'll share that with you. You might not like it, but as I said, I'm not worried about that. If you understand it, you want to use it, that's entirely up to you. Okay, let's just have a look at this. These are 3 words that people actually get confused. As I've said, are we confused about this? That they are interlinked, but they are quite different. The imagination is just letting this. I mean, how many of you have been in meetings or you've been in a conversation with people and you've come up with an idea, suddenly that idea suddenly sparked into your mind and you've thrown it out there and somebody said, what a load of rubbish. That will never work. We tried that 6 months ago and the boss will get it. We'll never get the money. And the idea dies. Well, that's one of the challenges with innovation, and I'll pick up on that a bit later. Creativity is just actually putting it together. The innovation side is actually doing it. And we'll see some of the hurdles to actually doing it, one of which is fear that it might not work and will I lose my job. We'll cover that as we go through. Now, just have a look at that. This is from Peter Drucker. You can just have a quick look at that. No, he died 2003, 2004, but I would suggest that if he was alive today, he would have a pretty good following on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything else. He's an interesting guy. If you look back at what he's been saying 30 years ago about what people are thinking about implementing today, he's been called a management guru. I would actually say he probably was. Not everybody liked what he said, but he was pretty close to the mark in terms of maybe what was going wrong and what companies needed to put things right. And that's what it says. You don't have to be a genius. And the whole thing about really innovation is bringing together a group of people, small or large, where you give them the opportunity to express ideas that could be unusual, unexpected, or sometimes even plain stupid. I know some people I say you can be stupid, and other people say, well, we're quite stupid all the time. But if you look at a lot of the ideas that have come up, it's because somebody came up with something off the wall, something left field, something unnatural. But as human beings, we're kind of channeled into expecting the expected. You know, something a bit left field, a bit too much change, and we like to keep ourselves on the straight and narrow for fear of change. So let's just go through. Remember Jack Welch? This is interesting. If somebody could have a crack at the projector, because get somebody to have a look at the projector because it's slipping. That is, if the change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is in sight. And if you probably know with Jack Welch, when he was at General Electric, every year they culled what they believed or they saw was the bottom 10% of performance in the company. Brutal or good business? You'll be deciding. Which is rather interesting, because I think Jack Welch now is now a consultant. As we switch across, there we go. See, perfect. Always have a little bit of patter ready in case this sort of thing happens, but which is good. Now, this is interesting. We'll get into the first bit of innovation. Next couple of slides. One of the slides, if I embarrass anybody, I apologise in advance. So what's coming up, you're thinking? Right, okay. Now, you might wonder what, you can see quite clearly what that is. That's Mount Everest and it's mountaineer. One of the problems with mountaineering was, you can see the guy with the face mask. One of the problems was that, as you know, if you climb Everest or any high mountain, the higher you go, the more oxygen you need. One of the problems was that the actual consumption of oxygen was only about 40%. A lot of it was wasted through the mask. So a group of army officers actually came up with a solution, and the solution actually meant that they were now breathing 70% of the oxygen and only losing 30%. How do you think they did that? A condom and a Coca-Cola can. Don't ask me technically or manufacturing how they did it, but they actually used a condom and a Coca-Cola can. How they actually did it, I don't know, but it reduced the wastage of oxygen from 60% down to 30%. Now, I bet you in a month of Sundays, come in, no, okay. In a month of Sundays, you would have probably not got anywhere near a Coca-Cola tin and a condom. But as the guy was explaining it, they just had a very long, drawn-out conversation. They just threw ideas around. If you remember Apollo 13 or Apollo 11, which that oxygen tank on Apollo 11 blew up, and they were written off by most of the engineers at NASA until, if you ever saw the film, they recreated on the ground all the components in the capsule. And out of that, they created the filter system, which they then communicated to the astronauts, which took the carbon dioxide out of the air sufficiently long enough so they could swing around the moon and come back. So that was an example of when your life's in danger, people suddenly become very, very creative. And I said, who would have thought? So I said, unnatural, unexpected. As I said, you probably wouldn't have thought of that. You'd have looked at some other kind of engineering or some kind of technical feat to do that. So, and that's saving lives. So not a bad innovation. How often, as I said just now, we look for the big wow, the big knockout punch, when you don't need to make it a big knockout punch. I mean, I'm sure probably in the industries and the companies you work in, how many of you would describe yourself as a leader in the company? And by leader, I don't mean CEO. I mean, you have a team of people underneath you, small or large. Yeah. And I would say, even to a CEO group, he will have leaders in a junior position, but they could be a leader on that particular project or that particular event. But we tend to associate it further up the ladder. Believe you me, most of the innovative ideas do not come from a board. They do not come from a board. They come from the rank and file. Almost some of the most junior people in the company come up with the most innovative ideas. The challenge then is getting them further up the board so they'll actually get the time of day to talk about it. Okay, here are some of the leaders. Just as a tip on presentation skills, I was running a presentation skills workshop for the speakers on Monday morning. Slides, make them as visual as you can. If you do have text, don't read the text line by line. It's a good way of sending people off to sleep. Unless, of course, you need sleep, in which case you can go to that type of presentation. All innovators in their own right, Churchill from the war, Branson, Thatcher, Lincoln. Lincoln, before he became president, failed at every election that he stood for. He just kept going until he got there. And that's another thing about innovation. You know, too many people give up. And one of the companies, which is Procter & Gamble, if you look at the book from A.J. Lafley, the former CEO, He looked upon, he said, you have to fail to go forward. A company cannot go forward without failing, because you have to learn from your failures. And how comfortable are we with failure? How comfortable are we? Oh yeah, we're happy to fail. I would question whether companies are comfortable with failing, and yet maybe you have to. Just have a look at that for a moment. We've all got them. We wake up in the morning, we see something, hear something, feel something, and straight away it triggers a response up there as to what we do believe and what we don't believe in. And this is what happens with innovation. We start doubting our own abilities to actually think, and I hate this phrase, but I'll use it, outside the box. We tend to keep ourselves in a narrow line. We tend to think about people will never buy into that. People will never believe it. It's not possible. We haven't got enough money. Can anybody just, if you can think of something, probably what you did something that you consider was innovative in your own company? It could be a process, a product, a system, the way that you go about things. Anybody like to share something they're actually particularly proud of on something that they innovated? Richard?
So I created a lifetime rewards for basically members of Best Western Hotels that actually qualified and then kept that qualification for 2 years. We now have a card where they have a lifetime card.
Yep.
They never lose their status and never lose their job.
And lifetime, particularly today, where if you don't meet the criteria, you get chopped. Yeah, I said it doesn't have to be huge. What's important is that your customers, they're the people that you're innovating for, and sometimes customers they don't want the big thing. Because think about it, you do something that wows the customer. That probably implies you're doing something pretty substantial. How often can you do something pretty substantial every time? That's hard, but small incremental things over a period of time. You can manage that and you can keep that going. But the big hallelujah every time somebody buys something from you, or a guest checks into a hotel, or somebody steps onto an airline, that's a bit tough. So as I said before, and what you've done, I think without in any way downgrading it, that wasn't a wow, but it was probably an incremental step.
Maybe I have a nice example.
Yeah.
At the time I was GM, a long time ago, from a hotel, and I was reading a book of a Swiss guy who was looking to behavior of customers in a hotel room. And I wrote that there are about 40% of the customers, women, who are looking under the bed. So I made a card, rating in the dark, so you can read it in the dark. And I was standing on, don't worry, we already cleaned it for you. Exactly that.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes them smile. And it was just was nothing.
Yeah.
It was a piece of paper under the bed, but it was just a joke.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best, if you can make people smile, even if they're complaining, you can make them smile. That's in itself is innovative. And I think actually probably, thank you, Richard, and thank you for that. It happens all the time, and the trouble is we don't necessarily see it as innovation. And sometimes things don't work. And as I said, nobody likes things that fail, but as I said before, it's got to fail to go forward. I just thought I'd share this is some of the limiting beliefs that we've had from groups and companies that we work from over the years. And I would suggest you'll recognise most of them, and probably a few more besides. It really does get in the way. And when you actually go back and look at those limiting beliefs and say to people, well, are they real or are they myth? 95% of them are purely up here, and a lot of them stem from a poor communication within a company. If you actually asked, you could actually get the resources. I know we've tried it before, but there's a CEO will say there's no reason why we can't try it again. And just to typify, this was actually a group that we worked in. This is Warsaw. It was a bank. I won't tell you which one. This was a senior lead, or the group immediately beneath the senior leaders. And one of the limiting beliefs that they believed that they had of the senior leaders was this. And if you've got a head office, I'm sure you've said that more than once before. And it was a breakdown, not just a breakdown, it was a complete lack of communication. Somebody thought somebody else was responsible for doing something that actually turned out not to be the case. So the poor old bankers, they still get beaten up even today, but this was only a couple of years ago. So part of that is, as leaders or the people who are working for you, it's a question of whether you give them that opportunity and say no idea is a bad idea. Do you remember, if you remember, who was it, NASA? Quite a few years ago, the astronauts were complaining they couldn't write in space because of gravity. So they said, we need a pen that we can write in space. They achieved that 2 years, and $10 million later, they got a pen where the ink flowed up. The Russians sold it in 2 minutes. They gave them pencils. Yeah. And when you think about it, what was the problem? The problem was purely that NASA asked the wrong question. Not how can we get a pen? The Russians said, how can we help you to write? Pencil. 2 million or 10 million and two years later. And we all laugh about it, but I'm sure NASA wasn't laughing. Well, no doubt the Russians probably sent them an email straight away and said, we did this in 2 minutes, you know. So part of this, it's all about, you know, this is not about something mercurial. This is not something, you know, we're standing on top of Mount Olympus and shouting it from the top. This is a state of mind of how you can actually move forward in terms of helping your people become innovative, where it's relevant to your customer base, not something for the sake of it. Change for the sake of it isn't going to work. Okay, this is a small checklist. These are some of the things that we've come across, and the things that it might be a checklist, but again, feel free to disagree. One of the things that people need to be able to do is this: it's a safe environment. I'll give you one example. Leadership group, we were 60 leaders from a very big company, and they were talking about innovation. And one of the guys stood up, he was a division head, and said to the CEO, he said, can I just clarify, if I actually challenge you or disagree with what I hear today, am I going to get fired? And the CEO said, absolutely not. The only way you'll get fired is if you don't challenge me. And that was a message that was picked up by everybody, and nobody got fired. In fact, there were things the CEO disagreed with, but he disagreed with it on the basis of, I disagree with it, but enough of you think it can work, I'll make the time and money available for that project. And once you got that out in the open, people were coming up with ideas that you couldn't believe. Now, they're working their way through those ideas. Some of them will come to fruition, some of them will fall off, but the whole point about it is that the CEO gave the free. And that does of course depend on the culture of the company. If you've got a leader who's autocratic, bureaucratic, it's going to be tougher. In Asia, where I come from 20 years, that's the culture in some Asian companies, not all, where it's still very, very dictatorial down from the top. The CEO says jump and everybody just says how high. That's going to be a debate. If you can create a safe environment that nobody will get fired for coming up with a wacky idea, nobody will get fired if they fail. Lafley in his book said, if you're going to fail, fail early and fail cheaply. But we have to fail to go forward. Some people are happy with that. Some people find that a bit harder to grasp. But you need to feel a bit uncomfortable. So the first thing is to create a safe environment. The second thing is, there are challenges. If you're losing market share, you're losing revenue, your margins are dropping, that's a challenge. Now, you can either stick your head in the sand and hope that it goes away, or you sit down with a group of people and try and work out what it is. But you've got to face those challenges head on. So I think there's that lovely phrase, the impossible we can do immediately, miracles take a little longer. But there is a solution out there, for virtually every problem. It just takes the time and the thought process to try and work out what it is. I mean, what you're up against is for every new product idea that comes onto a drawing board, every 199 never see the light of day. Maybe wrongly. Maybe the processes that companies have eliminate really good products, and you only end up with one that works. So that's the sort of thing about challenges. So I would say on that, are you challenged and emotional about your work? So I was saying to some people on Monday, in terms of decisions, do you think most decisions are made today with the head, or do you think decisions today are made primarily with the heart? What do you think? Do you think decisions are made by the head, or do you think decisions are made by the heart, or even the gut? Yeah, So it varies, But to get a buy-in with anything, if you want to get a message across, there's a lot more emotion. If an audience buys into what that's what you want them to do, you're going to have to get into the heartstrings, the real feelings about it, the real emotional side. How much freedom do you give your people to make those mistakes? How much freedom do you give for people to actually get to the winning line, however they want to do it, or do you put them in a straitjacket? Or handcuffs, or half a handcuff, or tie one arm behind the back. And part of that is when you give people that freedom to go, you've also got to give them the accountability. Not simply spend shovelfuls of money in the hope they might get it right. But certainly groups that that we've worked with and seen some of the things they've come back with, they didn't spend lots of money. They just got the right people together and made a lot of effort up here and a lot of effort up here. So it's very doable. How often do you have the time to think? How many of you say on a daily basis, we've got 30 minutes where you can just close the door, turn off your mobile, or put your laptop on silent, or the case may be, and just have time to think? And that's part of the problem, but we need that time to think about what's happening or what's not happening. We're so busy running from pillar to post. And that comes out in the work that we do. People say, we're just tired. We're running from pillar to post. We don't have time to think. We're just simply turning stuff out, a bit like a sausage machine. For the innovation side, you need that time to think, to review it. And so every decision needs to be reviewed. And I had the privilege about 3 years ago of meeting the former NATO Commander-in-Chief, Stanley McChrystal, the American commander. And when you see this guy, he looks the part. He's 6'2", slim, full head of hair, and looks the part. And I said to him, well, with the military, when you give orders, people, just follow it. He said, that's a misconception. He said, there's two reasons why people follow the orders. He said, one, they believe in what we're doing, the purpose. He said, the second thing is they believe in me. And I thought, And that made me think. So from a leader point of view, I suppose it's part of, do they believe in what you're trying to do? If you are the CEO or you're the head of division, and do they believe in the purpose of what you're asking them to do? So that's where the emotional side comes in terms of people actually getting on and doing things. Do you come up with lots of ideas, or do you come up with one idea at a time? It's up to you. You'll certainly probably end up with one idea that you want to further and move forward. You can't deal with too many at one time anyway, but certainly one idea at a time, and preferably one you love. Going back to Edison, I think it's well documented. It took him about 9,000 goes before he got to the light bulb. And his answer was that, he said, I just found now 9,000 ways that didn't work. And that's an attitude to failure that is actually very positive. And that's Edison. I don't know how many years ago was that, 150, 160 years ago? But there's still companies, Procter & Gamble, 3M give, I think it's a day a month to their engineers to go off and do whatever they like in furtherance of the business. And they've got a budget for doing it. So they've got a day a month. You can do whatever you like with the day of the month to further the business, to try experiments. And they've got a budget for it. So that's a very, very, very open. People say, oh yeah, but it's 3M, they're bigger. It's not, it's the philosophy of giving people time. Half a day a month. In this case, it's 1 day a month. So it works. Part of it is, can you find, if you've got this idea that people think there's an opportunity, have you got the resources? Do you need extra people? Do you need extra money? Do you need a certain amount of time? Can you create it? Because if it's a flat no, there are no resources, then maybe you've got to steal from something that you've already got set up and put it into the new project. So think about it from the resources. So we're talking about challenges, we're talking about freedom, we're talking about safe environment, a culture, and we're talking about resources. Any questions thus far?
We talk about copying. Copy.
Coping.
Copy. Like take ideas from other people.
Oh, yeah. I think yes. Yeah.
They copy
Oh yeah.
usually, and then they switch it or twist it.
Yeah.
And come with something new.
Yeah.
But it's not completely new from scratch.
No, I mean you'll always get that. I mean yeah, it's the famous. If you've ever, well, maybe some of you have been to Malaysia, it was well known. If you didn't buy CDs in Singapore, you went to Malaysia, because you could get 50 CDs for $10.
This is almost stealing. But
Yeah,
I'm saying,
yeah,
not on the stealing side, but on twisting it
yeah.
to fit to culture, to fit to situations, and it's not always need to be really new like nobody thought about it.
Oh no, I mean this.
Things are
No.
turned around, and everybody's copying from everybody and twist it and do very nice things from it.
Well, I can think of a very simple thing, and we're in a hotel. We all go to banquets and dinner dances, and we get a plate of food and we get a glass of wine, and we're sort of doing this. And some hotels did it. They got that little clip, which you could put your glass in. I mean, simple, and yet as a innovative, yes. Did it help us? Sure as hell. It freed up one arm.
Who invented it?
I don't know.
The Ritz in Paris.
It was the Ritz in Paris. Thank you, Steve. Well, there you go.
And
So,
everybody's copying it.
yeah.
It's not right.
Yeah.
It was done 100 years ago.
But it's again, if you can come up with something innovative, and maybe you scale it, you say, look, there's innovation for major products, and there's sort of minor innovations, but that sort of thing, it's what benefits customers. Clearly, if you can come up with a new product design which creates a barrier to entry for the competition, how long does it do that? Some of the bigger companies work out that they've got about 2 years in that market before they've got to get out, but they work out their figures so they can make a return, and then they get out. That's their strategy. Quick hit and out. But I think it's from an innovative point of view. Again, it's a continuous process. As I said right at the very beginning, it doesn't start and stop. It's part of the DNA. It's part of the culture. Some companies have bonuses for culture. I can't remember the name of the company now, but they've got a room not much smaller than this, and it's just white walls. It's whiteboards. And it's called the creativity room, and people can go in and write anything they like on that whiteboard about how they think a process can be improved. It's just taking the sort of employee suggestion box to a different level. There's no personal comments, there's no insults, it's how we can improve it. And people go in and add things to ideas that have already been put up there. And that just gives people the opportunity to express the freedom of speech, put an idea in. And those sorts of things encourage people to, through an open culture. And again, the ideas that come out, you can't legislate for the ideas that you'll get up, but some of them really are quite extraordinary. Yeah.
Why do I want to innovate?
Okay, let me ask you this question. Why wouldn't you?
I've got a good product.
Yeah.
Why not new hospitality?
Mm.
Why would I set up a whole set of, why would I do it?
Okay,
Innovate,
what
try to innovate.
Yeah, what product have you got?
Huh?
What product have you got? Which product? What do you sell? What's the process you've got?
Look, if you've got a good product, why would you set up a whole line of innovation to innovate a product? Why would you do that?
Okay, what car do you drive?
Sorry?
What car do you drive?
I don't have a car.
Okay, how do you get around?
I don't get on a bicycle.
On a bicycle? And what sort of bicycle is it?
Sorry?
What sort of bicycle is it?
It's a handmade Amsterdam bicycle.
Yeah. Okay.
It's got wheels and
Mm.
a steer.
That it's got
It's
brakes.
been there for the last
You've got brakes on
300
it.
years.
Yeah, you got brakes?
It doesn't brakes.
Yeah.
Doesn't take.
Somebody came up with brakes. Brakes on it. So we hit a wall.
I mean, the short answer to your question is you don't have to if you don't want to. It's a question of whatever business you are in or innovative. We can sit here and say, do you know what? I'm happy with what I've got. Richard Solomons of IHG on the couch yesterday when he was asked by Michael Hurst, what's the one thing you think which keeps you awake and that you're worried about? And he said complacency.
Sorry?
Complacency. It's where complacency is, we're doing okay. We don't need to change. And believe,
Richard Solomon said.
yeah, that's what Richard Solomon said. Yeah. He said about complacency.
Right? No.
Richard Solomons, he's the chief executive of IHG. I mean, the short answer is you don't have to. The consequence of that action is that whatever business you're in, whatever product or service or process you're marketing, you sit there and cruise. That's your choice. Somebody else comes. You just go to telecommunications. Was it Mitsubishi or one? I can't remember who it was now. No, Motorola, I think. The telephone. They had that new. This is going back 10, 12 years. The telephone. They were fine. They had the market leader. Never saw Nokia coming. Nokia overtook them and ditched them to the side. Nokia has now been caught by Samsung. And they might have said maybe what you said. I'm not saying they did. Or BlackBerry. If you haven't got a BlackBerry, well, Kodak. Kodak was essentially a chemical company. And the rest can, or Kodak can't, as the case may be. So, I mean, it's your choice. As I was right at the very beginning, you don't have to. It's a question, if you've got the best act in town, you're the guy in the desert with the water hole, you probably don't need to. But or Microsoft. Microsoft in the last 18 months, if you look at all the financial analysts, they've been late to market on everything in the last 18 months. They've been playing catch. Now, Microsoft has had a very dominant position, still has. But I think the issue is, the trouble is at the point where you suddenly realise, as Jack Welch says, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the change on the inside, you've got a problem. But that's your choice. If you want to stick with what you've got, that's your choice. If you get caught, that would be down to you.
Richard Solomon says, I stick with where I am.
No, what he's saying, no, Yeah, complacency means I'm happy with what we're doing. We don't need to change. Yeah. Don't worry. But yeah, I mean, I think this is, when you look at industries, and I'll take some of the British, the motorbike industry and the motor car industry in the United Kingdom. I mean, that disappeared 25 years ago. The Japanese came along with a better, cheaper, more reliable product, and the British couldn't compete. Oh, yeah. Austin, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, long time, and that's not Austin Powers either. But, so I think this whole thing about, as I said, you have that choice. But equally it goes now to companies, people, the workforce joining the workforce now, Generation Y, if that's what we want to call them. You know, they're a different breed of people. They want to know, when they go to HR people, they want to know how that, if I join you, how are you going to grow my career? I'm doing you a favour, Mr. HR Director, by talking to you. It's not the other way around. HR Director says, I'm doing you a favour, I might let you join our company. If you're thinking that, then you're going to have a problem. But thank you for the question. This one has been shot to pieces since global financial crisis. You know, isn't it a shame? All that before 2008, somebody said, "I work in a bank," and oh, really? I work in a bank. Yeah. And now people say, "Where do you work?" Oh, I work in a bank. You know. I don't like to say I work in a bank. You know. And that, you know, as it says there, that's exactly what the banking industry was. And there may be others. Same thing with a brand. It takes 20 years to build a brand. There was a guy in England a few years ago, Gerald Ratner. He ran a firm of a jewellery company. And he stood up at the Institute of Directors, this is about 8-9 years ago, and said, let's be honest, our stuff is crap. National television, worldwide television. 18 months, the business shut down. And he broke that trust. So when that CEO said to that guy who stood up, if you challenge me, you won't get fired. As a leader, you might get fired if you don't challenge me. If you become a yes man, I don't need you. And he happens to be a particularly good CEO. And he's very much like this, very much like this. So this, as you'll see, as I said, I'll send you the slides. You can see these things. It is a kind of checklist. And I'll show you one at the end. How open are you? How open are you to hearing things you don't like? And I'll give you one personal example. I was in Hong Kong. The team came up, not very similar to what Richard was talking about with his loyalty card for Best Western. They wanted to revamp the loyalty club within the hotel. And I just didn't think it was going to work. But I had 6 people who said, boss, it'll work. Now, I'm sure, you know, and I eventually said, get on with it. But the heart was, now the head was saying, this isn't going to work. And the heart was saying, maybe it would. And it worked. And I learned that lesson. And I said, look, and they were then concerned because I hadn't bought into the idea, but was saying, get on with it. They were concerned that what happens if it doesn't work? And I said, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I'm not going to come back and say, I told you so. And I'm not going to come back and say, you're fired. It did work, and it actually worked very well. So that's another one. It's a kind of a leap of faith when a leader thinks, is this going to work? I haven't bought into it, but his team does. So that's another sort of psychological barrier to overcome. And how much time do you spend during the day to discuss these types of things? Even if it's 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute. I've certainly seen in my corporate career, and I worked probably in one company in that corporate career that had pretty most of everything that we had up here. And it was a different environment altogether. It was just a completely different environment. The results that were achieved were, I look back on it now, I thought they were pretty good at the time. I look back on it now, and they were even better. So this whole thing about discussing, this is the one about Socrates, which I pulled out. So interesting. Now this guy was, 498 BC? He's coming up with these comments, you know. And sometimes in companies, isn't it, you know, the politicians, you know, try and stab somebody in the back, or maybe stab them in the chest. But that's politics. So the more open, the more freedom there is, maybe the greater the chance. This is probably what happens as well. I think we've all been there before, haven't we? At one time or another in our lives. Okay. As it says, you know, it's just a little phrase I pulled up. There's hundreds of them, but I think that's actually quite nice. How do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with maybe an idea where 3 of your people think it's just not the right part, and then 3 people think it is the best part? And I'll show you how that might be able to overcome it a little bit later. So You know, conflict. Generally speaking, do you see conflicts as positive or negative? In general, do you think, oh God, or good? Yeah, yeah. Some people say exactly what it is. It's in a selling scenario, as would in a very simple way. A buyer says to a salesman, "I think you're too expensive." Now, a salesman will see that as an objection or what have you, and goes into reverse gear. When in actual fact, you know, any buyer who's actually asking questions about, or even raising questions about a product's reliability or quality, is actually giving you reasons as to why he's not actually buying. So, my personal belief is, like some of you said, I think it's far more positive than negative. At least you know what's on that person's mind, as opposed to them sitting there and keeping quiet. So that's kind of another limiting belief. Oh, conflict is bad. I'd rather have a conversation with a buyer who raises lots and lots of questions rather than somebody who sits there and just says yes all the time. Because if he's saying yes all the time, he's probably not the person I should be talking to. And that happened to me many years ago, but I'll say that for another day. As I say, is that light at the end of the tunnel? Or is that another train? I'll leave you to decide. Risk. Would most of you, or how many of you would accept that if you're going to innovate and move things forward, make things better, change things, there has to be an element, or there needs to be an element of risk in it? Can you do something for nothing? Can you achieve all these extra gains, incremental gains, big gains, by no risk at all? Yeah. I think there has to be that element of risk. Some of the phrases, you know, if you want to explore new horizons, you've got to step off the shore. There's lots of phrases out there, but you know, bigger returns, bigger the risk. I think for an investment conference like this, there's a fairly high degree of risk in there, depending on how the deals are leveraged, who the partners are, where the hotel is going to be built, if it indeed is a hotel, and so on and so forth. This is what Lafley said, which I mentioned a bit before. Regarded as probably the best CEO Procter & Gamble have ever had. And I think the results speak for themselves. That's a mind map. If that's purely a mind map, if some of you have used mind map, it's a communication tool. You don't have to use it, but you'll see that when you go back to your offices, and I'll send you as I said, the slides. You might want to sort of ask your teams. This is good. So I want you to answer 10 questions. You know, how challenged are we on a scale of 1 to 5? How open are we? How risk-taking? That'll give you a very sort of just a bellwether idea of whether you're working with a group of people who are actually open to innovation and quite prepared to take risk. That's just, well, you work out what it is. You'll get a score of 45 or a score of 9, and you'll see where you are. Have any of you heard of the HBDI? This particular psychometric. Have any of you have heard of the MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator? Now, both of these are psychometrics. There is no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. There's no pass or fail. There's no black or white. But when it starts to come to bring people together, you get 10 people in a room, and it happens in the majority of cases today. You get 10 people. You have no idea what the mix of those people is in the room. Ideally, what you're looking for is to have people in all 4 quadrants. Why? Why would you want 4 people spread across the 4 quadrants? Have a guess. Synergy, yes. Teamwork, yeah. Balance, yeah. Gives new ideas. Because each of those, we all of us have a thinking style. We all have a personality, which drives what we do at work, what we do at home, how it drives our lives. And what that is, if you've got people who say you've got a team of people, I'll show you an example in a minute, who are all in the blue quadrant, they will all get on. They'll get on quite quickly, and they'll probably think the same way. And everybody says, "Great, we all think the same way." Well, George Patton from the American General said, "If everybody's thinking the same way, nobody's actually thinking." No, think about that. Yeah, I said, and I think I've got another one here. Yeah, here we go. This was an insurance company. All right. All mainly in the blue. So nothing with synergy about creativity, nothing about empathy, which is people. So pretty much left brain. This is the way it's set up. They're pretty much a left brain company. Now the next slide shows an advertising company that was going to pitch to this insurance company. So that's the insurance company, and that's the advertising. How do you think the pitch went?
Not well.
Right. Steve says not well. Who believes it didn't go well? Okay. Why? Let me ask you. The important thing is why. You got it in one. Advertising agents tend to be creative by nature. Okay. So it was built around sort of creativity, the emotional side, the blue cloud effect, and white clouds and blue sky, and isn't it all wonderful, and so on and so forth. And what the insurance company wanted, the detail, the dotting of the I's and the crossing the T's, and a very structured approach. And they only found we did this afterwards, and this is what they found anyway. They resolved the problem. They eventually won the account, but it was just interesting. But this happens in companies, teams. It happens in teams where that spread, that scatter is very, very limited. So people reach conclusions too quickly. People reach decisions too quickly. Because if there aren't people who can raise their hand, somebody in, say, a green quadrant on this can raise their hand and say, hang on a second, how is this going to affect the organisation? And I've got numerous examples of where one person who was sitting on their own, or somebody in a team who hadn't been heard, actually was then heard, and saved a company $500,000. It was a company that was going to move a whole number of managing directors around the region, until this one lady put her hand up and said, but have we asked them? They were pretty much like that. And this lady was in the red quadrant. Her thinking was tend to be people orientated. So she stuck it, and she was the finance director. Finance and people, not always happy bedfellows, but this case. And that's where, in fact, this company was pretty much like that. This one lady was in the red. So she put her hand up and said, but did anybody ask them? Does anybody ask these MDs if they're open to a move? And the short answer was, nobody had asked. They did go back and ask, and of the 10 managing directors, 8 said they didn't want to move. So if they'd moved them, they estimated the cost of that disruption would have been close to $1 million. So all I'm saying here is that within the teams you work with, and if you want to do this, it's not an expensive exercise, believe you me. There's no right or wrong, but it will give you some idea of how you're thinking. Where did your thinking sit? Is it broadly based, or is it very narrow? It doesn't matter if it's narrow in any one of those quadrants, you're missing out on opportunities for other people's thinking to add to what you're looking to innovate. It'll take longer to reach a decision, but you'll have a more robust, certainly more robust outcome. That's a telecom engineering team, even more so. I stress, there is no right or wrong about which quadrant you're in. It is what it is. It's how that scatter of thinking is actually measured. Brainstorm. How many of you have been into brainstorming sessions? And do you think they work? What's the problem with brainstorming? It becomes argumentative. Yeah, what else? 20 people sit down, the boss says, I've had an idea over the weekend about how we can improve X and Y. Yeah, all right. And I've come up with these 3 ideas. What do you think? And they'll, depending on the culture or not, people say, got a great idea, boss. But they're argumentative. Does everybody join in? Often, more often than not, no. They control. Yeah. Yeah. It is, and particularly where I am in Asia, if there was 20 people in a room, there would be at least 10 or 11 different nationalities for whom English is not their mother tongue. So there's me standing up talking in English, and potentially, which I don't, using big words, which they won't understand. Now, I'll just use Japan. So you've got a Japanese guy in the room whose English isn't bad, but it's not as good as my English. And I say something that he misinterprets or misunderstands, puts his hand up, and says, oh, I think it's this. And somebody says, where did you get that from? That's absolutely meaningless. Straight away, he'll withdraw from the meeting. He's not going to put his hand up again to be ridiculed. No, nobody would. So I'll show you in a second the process that we go through. And we call this mind maxing. You can use this. I can tell you it works. It works at board level. It works at the most junior level. But you be the judge as though if you want to watch it. The first thing we do, we split the room or the group work into small groups, probably tables of 6. Because 6 gives you, should give you a reasonably good perspective and opinions and thoughts and views. You give people the subject you're talking about, whatever it is, and you let that group decide or clarify the topic. They actually understand what they're going to be talking about. To Richard's point about being argumentative, the biggest single issue is around that table with 6 people, or 3 tables of 6, we let people think in their own mother tongue for 2 or 3 minutes. Just write down all the thoughts that they need. And we simply say, don't start analysing it. Don't start thinking if it's good or bad. As the thoughts come into your mind, just drop them down on the paper. We use mind mapping, but I'm not going to go into that today. And that 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes of people thinking on their own gives them the chance. Now, so you've got 6 people around a table, you give them 3 minutes. So let's supposing in that 3 minutes they come up with 5 ideas. You've now got 30 ideas. 30 ideas in 3 minutes. Brainstorming will not even get close to that. The point is, nobody's had anything knocked off the table. What we then do, we appoint a leader on the table, and he goes round on a piece of paper and goes round each person and takes one idea down. So now you've got a piece of paper or a map, depending on how you want to put it. You've now got 30 ideas. We then do another process. Say to those people, right, of those 30, what do you think are the priorities? So that 30 comes down to maybe 17. Maybe that 17 comes down to 10. But those groups, it's the group that decides what the priority is, not the boss, not me. They decide until you end up with an action plan or a group of priorities, which is 3. So 30 is chunked down to 3. No idea is knocked off the table, certainly not by me or my colleagues. It's decided by group discussion. I've walked very, very quickly through this, but this is something that we apply all the time. So 3 tables, 6 people, you come up with 30 ideas. We use a software where we record the ideas on screen. We ask people to prioritise. We record the ideas on screen. So maybe we end up with 10. We then get the 3 groups to go back into their tables and talk about what they think are the 3 priorities. So the group does it in about 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 minutes. It knocks brainstorming straight out of the hat. Everybody contributes. No idea gets knocked off. There is no argument. People discuss as to what works and what doesn't. The group comes up with the action or the priorities. It's not influenced by us other than giving them the time and the process. And that's the most important one. Let people think on their own. And this is where you get the unnatural answers. Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese interpret what I say in their own language, and they come up with an idea. And that's when you come up with some really extraordinary ideas, because they misinterpreted what I said, but they heard it in their language. Nobody gets shot down. Nobody says it's a bad idea. Nobody says it doesn't work. And that's why we call it mime. That's called mime. And now what we will tend to do after that, we'll bring everything together, and then we will produce a final action plan. So in the case of, I don't think I've got this slide on here, or have I? Yes, I have. This will give you a good example. This was a company we worked with. We created the map. That's the software that creates the map. That's the number, what I was saying just now. 16 nationalities, 60 people, 12 operations. They went through that mind-maxing process. We created the map. How long do you think that group of 60, the caveat, we had worked with them before, so they were familiar with the process. How long do you think it took them to get that output? That's what they were talking about. They were split with different tables. How long do you think it took that group to create the output? We got the output, we created the map, just simply to get the output out. Half an hour? 20 minutes? Any advances? 5 minutes. I need to chat to you afterwards. 21 minutes. The average answers range from 3 hours to 3 months. Or if I choose one person, they would never do it. We can't agree on anything, but that's another story. Brainstorming, you'll never get that. Brainstorming will never get close to 21 minutes. This works. It works with every company and every group. And that's where people actually, you see some of the most amazing ideas that how people can improve a process. One company saved $1 million on their purchasing process, which they immediately reinvested $750,000 back into sales and marketing, just by sitting down and looking at the process. Another company took their go-to-market, they reduced it from 18 months down to 6 months. And this was, nobody claimed it was their idea, it was a team. Somebody said a bit earlier about better teamwork. When you see a team achieve those types of results, it has to be good. But yes, it's part of the freedom, open culture, safe environment, resources to do it.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Where do you think Edward de Bono's 6 acts process, because that obviously takes out the argumentative side of the thought process, because everybody's thinking the same way at the same time.
Yep.
So you don't get into the argument. But do you see this mind maxing as being one stage further part of the same process?
It's another process, and I've used 6 acts thinking. So what it does, what both do, it takes out the argument. It stops somebody, if you're having a general conversation, it stops, say, the finance guy leaping in and saying, we'll never have the budget for that. And there's some, have any of you heard of Edward de Bono's 6 acts thinking? It is, it's different colour hats to talk about. It's like, to a certain extent, that HBDI segment, there's 4, he uses 6 hats. Red, black, green, blue. So the group talks about. So mind maxing could actually work alongside the 6 hats thinking if you want to do it. I like 6 hats thinking. Yeah, 6 hats? Yeah, it is. It does. It stops people. No, and that's where you need a good facilitator or chairman. Somebody starts talking about another colour when everybody's wearing a red hat. You quietly, I wouldn't say slap him down. You quietly keep him quiet. And this was just the results tree that we use with people. And I mentioned before about where the results actually come from. And it's below. People talk, the results you get work back to the behaviours. But this is where that's where most, it's below the line. Thinkings, feelings, values and beliefs. That's when you get the culture, the buy-in, where people are happy to be work. I mean, if you talk about an individual's values versus the company values, I think in a bank, I'm not quite sure what their values are. I did ask a group of bankers once, I said, what's your purpose? And you can imagine almost to a man or woman, they said, make money. And I said, that's an outcome. What's the purpose? Needless to say, they struggled on that. But a lot of the companies we work with have a really good purpose. One in particular is to reduce poverty. That's their purpose. They're in the nutritional field. And we got involved in a conference a couple of months ago that was actually talking about helping reducing stunting, which is kids which are born with a growth problem. And I'll tell you, that was government bodies and everything. It was a fantastic input, fantastic conference, and that for us was great to be involved. So these sorts of things. And all I can tell you about mind maxing, it works. 6 hats thinking, combine the two, that's probably even better. So innovation, I said, we've talked about a number of things. It's not saying, oh, we'll have an innovation day. It's allowing people to come up with ideas as and when they come up with them, to use the process so if people want to think on their own, and in meetings, meetings in my humble opinion should be decision-making forums, not simply people coming up to tell everybody over half an hour how busy they are. But decision-making forums is what meetings should be. People should be given the opportunity. If you want to incentivize innovation, yeah, why not? Somebody comes up with an idea that generates $200,000, why not give them the team 5% bonus? I don't know, whatever it is. That's assuming people are motivated by money. Not everybody is. Any questions?
Why do you think companies fail? So take Kodak or Blockbuster or Comet or anything like that. You get to a point that they clearly think they're in one business, but actually they're not. Kodak is the same chemical company, latterly they filled company. But were they in the memories business? Should they be the Instagram and the Pinterest and the, let's say, the YouTube? They just missed the business they were in. They were actually selling memories, but they didn't understand that.
Yeah.
So when you actually get to a point, it's very difficult to get out of that. You've got shareholder value. You've got all these very sort of challenging elements to a established organisation. But then you get disruptive innovators coming in, and they don't have any shareholder value. They've got investment. So what they do is they're encouraged to innovate. And what that does is completely disrupt established businesses. So when do you have to do that? Because they shouldn't, Kodak, Blockbuster, they shouldn't have actually had the demise that they had.
No, I think the answer is, to use a nautical term, the periscope has got to be consistently above the water. You can't, as Richard Solomon says, you've got to be looking at what's happening in the marketplace. You've got to have your tentacles out there, listening, sucking up information, just in case that you will get caught. As I said, Motorola, Nokia, BlackBerry.
Well, tell me what BlackBerry failed. They were very innovative.
Well, I think BlackBerry. I've never had a BlackBerry, but from the functionality on BlackBerry apparently was a problem. As when Samsung and Apple just overtook them in terms of tech. I think in the Middle East, wasn't it? BlackBerry was blocked or something by the authorities. That probably wasn't. It might have been a major thing. I don't know. I think it was based purely on functionality. They might have come up with functionality that people didn't want. They thought this is an innovative functionality, but customers didn't want it. And even now, Samsung are giving Apple a run for their money. I've got a Samsung, and I quite like it. My kids have got an Apple, or an iPhone 5, and they love it as well. I think that the whole, back to Richard's question, whatever you're doing, today, 30 years ago, you could have sat back for 4 or 5 years and just carried on. But sooner or later, someone's going to come up with something that is a lot better than what you're doing. And you know, it's was it Michael Porter's 5 Forces of Strategy? You know, barriers to entry. If you can come up with something, Heinz in particular, they came up with some product lines. It was Heinz, Hewlett-Packard. You know, in their early days, they came up with something like 24 months. They thought 24 months they would have a clear run at it, and then by which time the competitors had come in. So we had to make the money in 24 months and then get out. Those are decisions that are taken at a board level. But as I said, it's incremental stuff. You can come up with a big wow, that's fine. If it's relevant and you've got the meteoric discovery, that's great. But lots of little things, I think actually you can achieve much better. I've flown, give me an example, personally, I've flown with Cathay Pacific for 20 years. And there's lots of little things they do which keeps me loyal. I fly to London from Singapore via Hong Kong. It takes me 4 hours longer and a couple of $300 more to do it. And people think I'm nuts. And I'll give you one example. I was coming back with my daughter October last year after doing the university run, and I went over the 3 million miles. And I got a tap on the shoulder somewhere over Moscow. That gave me a bit of a shock. He said, Mr. Bigger, did you realise you'd just gone over the 3 million miles? I said, matter of fact, I hadn't. She said, well, we'd just like to say thank you, and here's a card from the crew. And it was a bloody great card. It wasn't a little note. It was an A4 card signed by all the crew, including the flight deck. I said, thank you for your service over the last 21 years, your customer the last 21 years. And I could feel people behind me going, who's this guy? Yeah, I could feel it. But now my revenue to Cathay is a ping pong ball in the Atlantic Ocean. But they still did that. That was a little, was it innovation? I don't know. But they took the time and trouble to do it. And that's what the real innovation test is. You actually go and do it. You don't talk about it and leave it till tomorrow. You actually go out there and do it. And they've broken rules for me. Is that innovation? Maybe. My miles expired by 2 months and I'd forgotten. I said, look, the mile, don't worry about it. You can have your redemption ticket. Wow. Yeah. So it's, at the end of the day, to your point, it's up to you. You can sit in the air, it's not for me. You can say, there's enough examples out there to say, if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. However small you are, however big you are. Somebody comes up with something really, really, really special. If you want a copy of the presentation, I said, just leave your business card. I'll be happy to send it to you. No charges. Try it. Try that. And if you try the mind maxing process, it's not quite as straightforward as it looks. You've got to practice it and work at it to make sure that you can let people have a free run at it, let people think on their own to come down with it. But the most important thing out of all those is set that safe environment. No one's going to get shot for coming up with some funny ideas.
Thank you.
Okay, you're more than welcome.